who I'm sure is going to appear on this screen in a matter of moments. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, member of the Scottish Parliament, first female minister of Scotland, the first female leader of any of the devolved administrations of the United Kingdom, and she is most welcome here. And she's going to be interviewed by a good friend of mine, Mary Louise Kelly, who has also just appeared on the screen. And I think all of us in the United States know Mary Louise from her All Things Considered program, the flagship program of National Public Radio. And she is a national security expert in her own right as a correspondent for NPR News. And of course, in virtue of her education at Harvard University, we're proud of her as one of our graduates, and of Cambridge University in the UK. So welcome to both of you. This is a brief conversation, so I'm not going to take much time, Mary Louise and Minister Sturgeon, but two thoughts on my mind. As the United Kingdom has now exited, obviously, from the European Union, it's seeking to redefine its place in the world. And I suppose Minister Scotland is too. The people of Scotland voted in 2016 to remain in the European Union. So is another referendum for independence in Scotland's future? I'm sure Mary Louise is going to get to that. I'm more interested as a foreign policy person about the hypothetical future should Scotland become independent. Would an independent Scotland support and protect and defend the Trident nuclear force? Because Trident, of course, is vital for the United Kingdom, but also vital for NATO, and also vital for the United States itself. So those are some of the questions on my mind, but I don't want to preempt this conversation. And Mary Louise, thank you so much for being with us. And Minister Sturgeon, a real honor to have you with us on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for a lovely introduction and for stealing two of my questions. I could just mute and you could take it away. Thank you for that. And Nicola Sturgeon, welcome from Edinburgh. We see the Scottish flag behind you. So glad you could join us. Welcome to America, as it were. And we'll look forward to welcoming you in person maybe the next time when we're all allowed to roam the world again.
I hope so. I much look forward to visiting again when we're able to travel freely, but it's a pleasure to join you virtually this evening, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
As am I. Well, let's start there with the reason that we can't do this in person or much else in person, the challenge that we are all living through right now in real time together around the planet, the pandemic. And I want to start there because you have just announced that Scotland will be scrapping most restrictions as of next Monday, August 9th. Why? What gives you confidence this is the right moment?
Well, in one word, vaccination gives me that confidence. Scotland, like the other countries of the UK, is now well through the process of vaccinating all adults. And just today we've got a recommendation from our expert advisors to now start to vaccinate 16 and 17-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And we know that the vaccines are making a difference. They are weakening the link between COVID cases and serious health harm from COVID. And that leads us to think we can lift most of the legal restrictions that have been in place. Not all of them. We're going to continue to require people to wear face coverings in many indoor settings in particular.
Yes, I was scanning the front pages of the Scottish papers today, and the Scottish Daily Mail, the headline is "Freedom," all caps, big exclamation point, and then it says, but the small print. What the small print is what? You're continuing the small print.
I don't like the term Freedom Day. I think to talk about freedom from an infectious virus or declaring victory over a virus is premature, and I don't think it is sensible. This virus is still circulating, it's still mutating, so it poses real risks to us. But how we deal with it is changing. So vaccination is changing that. And instead of legally imposed restrictions on people's lives, we're moving more to a situation where we're asking people to be sensible and careful. So because the law will no longer tell you to keep 2 meters or 1 meter distant from people, that doesn't mean we won't continue to advise people to be careful about distance from people in other households, or being careful about hand hygiene and all of the other things we've got used to doing. We're in a much stronger position right now, but this is still a pandemic raging across the globe. We know it poses risks for us, so let's be careful and cautious as we plot our way back to normality.
Are you coordinating this with Boris Johnson across the border? Because England has had a very different roller coaster ride than Scotland during this pandemic.
I'm trying to coordinate with Boris Johnson and the First Ministers of Wales and Northern Ireland, the other two nations that make up the four nations of the UK. And yes, in many respects, on many occasions, we have coordinated very well. You know, England and Wales and Scotland, we share an island. We are different countries with different governments, but we share an island, so it makes sense to do that. Sometimes we've differed and disagreed. I haven't always agreed with Boris Johnson's decisions about the pace of lifting restrictions. I respect his right to take those decisions, but as First Minister of Scotland,
freedom in England a month ago, we should know it, and Scotland said not so fast.
We decided to go slower and to be more careful. England has taken their decisions, and thankfully, we see cases reducing in England now as well. So vaccination is providing a real protection for all of us across the UK. So it's really positive. But I think this virus has surprised us with most recently the Delta variant in the past. It has the ability to surprise us and be unpredictable in the future. So we really should be careful not to lower our guards against it too much. And of course, there's still a big job to be done in supporting other parts of the world to match the progress we've been able to make here and I know in the United States on vaccination.
As we discuss freedom from COVID restrictions, and point taken that you don't love the word, let's discuss freedom from the UK. Where are you in terms of timing on a second referendum?
Well, I've just won an election with record-breaking results, actually, in many respects, on a very clear prospectus, which I gave a commitment to the people of Scotland that my focus, as long as we are in this acute phase of COVID, is on getting us through that and into the recovery phase. But at the right time, when we're in the recovery, in order to equip ourselves best to recover economically and socially, Scotland should have that choice of becoming an independent country.
And I suppose that's why I'm asking, as you prepare to lift most restrictions, you're headed toward the recovery phase.
Yeah, so I've not put a date on it yet, and many people in Scotland would like me to do that. In the election, I said I would want to give people in Scotland that choice, and it is a choice, remember. I've got a very firm view of what I would like that choice to be, but it is a choice, and I would like to offer that choice in the first half of this term of our Parliament, which is by the end of 2023, and we'll judge within that when the best time to offer that choice is. And I don't take these things for granted, but I'm pretty confident that when that choice is offered to the people of Scotland, partly because of our experience of being disregarded, not least on the issue of Brexit, since the last time we had this choice, I'm pretty confident people in Scotland will vote by majority to become an independent country when we continue to be the best of friends and cooperate with the other parts of the UK, but can make our own way in the world and cooperate more fully with countries elsewhere.
You mentioned the election that you just won, although your party, the SNP, is one seat shy of a clear majority, which makes this a little bit more of a task for you to pull off. Yeah. And I do wonder, since you raised Brexit, I get that you are the leader of the SNP. This is what you do. This is what you believe in. But does it still feel like quite such a good idea, having seen how difficult it has been to disentangle the UK from the EU? An alliance that, a partnership that lasted mere decades. Untangling Scotland from the UK is decoupling an alliance that has endured and prospered for 300 years.
It's a very fair question, and I want to address it. In short, yes, I do still think it's a good idea. In fact, that view has been reinforced by Brexit, but we've also learned a lot from the Brexit process. Before I address that a little bit more, my party fell one seat short of a majority. That is true, but remember, we have a proportional representation system here in Scotland, which is designed to stop a majority. So getting that close involves breaking records. So, it can be described as something that's a negative, but to get that close to a majority is meant to be undoable in Scottish parliamentary democracy. But I digress. On the issue, Brexit, those who argued for Brexit did no preparation, they did no planning, they did no thinking about what Brexit meant in practice. So when the UK-wide vote was for the UK to leave the EU, nobody had a clue what it meant. Nobody had a clue how to take that referendum result and turn it into practice. And then you had all sorts of competing views about what Brexit meant. Some people thought it meant leaving the EU but staying in the single market. Other people thought it meant the opposite of that. And so the whole process was chaotic. And that's why the process of, to use your word, disentanglement became so vexed and so difficult in the Brexit context. I would never want to put forward such an unprepared, underprepared perspective for Scottish independence. At the last referendum, we put forward a 600-700 page prospectus of what independence would look like and how we would go about delivering it. So the preparation,
the Brexit experience does not give you pause because you would be doing more planning and have
you do it differently now. Does that mean we don't look at that and think, well, how do we make sure we don't make the same mistake? Does it remind us that no process like this is straightforward or easy, and we shouldn't pretend to people that it is? There will be challenges and hurdles and pretty difficult problems that we have to solve along the way. But the benefits, I think, will be significant. Independence doesn't mean that Scotland as a country doesn't face challenges or problems, but it puts finding the solutions to these problems in our own hands. And remember, there are 200 or so independent countries across the world who would never give up or never want to give up their independence, and they cooperate well together in many cases. And that's what Scotland wants, to become a normal independent country like all the others across the world.
Why has support for independence dropped from the historic high last year? Something like 58% of Scots were in favour. It's a little lower now.
We see fluctuation, and I think we reached a particular high point. It's dipped a bit since then, but it is still at, if we look at this in the historical sweep, at historically high levels. When people in Scotland voted the last time, and I said a moment ago, Scotland wants independence. Of course, when people in Scotland voted for it the last time, a majority voted against that, and 45% voted for it. All polls show now that support for independence is higher. Amongst the younger age groups in Scotland, it is, in some opinion polls, as high as 70% support for Scottish independence. So we're seeing, in that broad sweep, historically high levels of support. But I don't take that for granted. The case has still to be argued and won, because Scotland will only become independent if a majority votes for it, not because I want it or my party wants it. We have to convince people that it is the best future for the country.
Yeah. Let me turn you to the security implications of this, because we're speaking to the security forum here, so this will be of special interest. Ambassador Burns raised the Trident nuclear force, and I'd love to let you speak to that. I'm just curious, from the higher level, given that Scotland's national security and foreign policy has been coordinated through London these past centuries, from a purely security perspective, without the rest of the UK, would Scotland not be much diminished on the global stage in terms of influence, in terms of clout?
I think the UK has been hugely diminished on the international stage in recent years, largely because of Brexit. There have been other factors at play there in terms of the posture of the UK. So I think the status quo in terms of the UK standing in the world has changed, and that is relevant to, I suppose, the question you have posed to me. But the short answer is no, I don't think it would. I would see an independent Scotland as being a constructive, multilateralist partner in the international stage. Often when we talk about nationalist or independence movements in a global sense, people think about movements that are insular and parochial. The reverse is true in Scotland. I partly want Scotland to be independent so that we can play a better role, a bigger role in the world. The rest of the UK would continue to be our closest neighbour, obviously geographically, and therefore our closest friend and ally. And the need for us to work together to secure all of us would be real. We also, and this is not uncontroversial in my party, we would want to be members of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. A country like Scotland, geographically, I think it is in our interest and in NATO's interest that we are there. As the ambassador said in the introduction, or alluded to, my party is strongly anti-nuclear weapons. We would not be a nuclear power, but then the vast majority of NATO countries are not nuclear powers and don't host nuclear weapons. But we would see our role in the world as positive, constructive, multilateralist, and playing our part in creating a more secure and fairer and more peaceful world. And that, I think, is a role that should be welcomed across the rest of the world.
What does the special relationship look like? If Scotland's relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom, with London, were to fundamentally change?
I think Scotland and the United States would continue to be the closest of friends and partners and allies. The links, family, business, cultural, between Scotland and the United States are long standing, and I think will last well into the future, and we'd be part of that dialogue and discussion that the UK is already part of. And we've got, I'm glad to say now, I think we've got better relations with the current US administration than we perhaps did with the recent one. But Scotland will be a constructive player on the international stage, I hope, as an independent country, well into the future, and can play. We're a small country, but can play a part, I hope, in trying to find some of the solutions to the thorny issues and challenges that the world faces right now. And of course, we're about to play host to COP26, which will bring the world together to try to live up to the biggest moral challenge and imperative that all of us face in the form of climate change.
Yes, well, thank you for that segue. I'll mention I'm about to open it up to questions in just another couple of minutes. So please put your questions in the chat and flag us. We'll try to take 2 or 3 at the end. But since you mentioned the big UN climate conference, which you will be hosting, Glasgow will be hosting in November. You've got something like 200 world leaders flying in. The Pope is flying in. And it's such a moment to be hosting this, as we sit speaking in a summer that has seen floods and drought and wildfire and heat waves. I think to a lot of us, it has felt like a tipping point in the history of this planet. This summer has in the history of climate change. So I'm curious, realistically, what you are hoping will come out of this summit.
Well, this is a massive moment for the world. This may be, in fact, probably is the last point at which we can come together and agree action that will deliver the Paris Agreement and save the world from what will otherwise happen in the form of climate change. So what I want to see from COP, I want to see an outcome from COP that has, countries all agreeing, nationally determined contributions, properly funded, that will see countries across the world do what needs to be done to meet that Paris objective. And if we fail to do that, then we'll be failing not just this generation, but generations to come. I lead a government that has committed to Scotland being net zero by 2045, to reducing emissions by 75% by 2030. Setting the targets is the easy part of this. Making the changes, and it's not just about individual behavior change, it's about governments, the traditionally biggest polluters in the world, making sure that real action is taken to meet those objectives. So just as Scotland has committed to doing what we need to do to live up to the Paris Agreement, we need to see countries across the world, particularly the bigger, most developed countries, do that too. And if we don't do that in COP, we will be letting down generations to come.
Let me open the floor to questions. We've got several coming in. I will start with one. This is from Stuart Johnson asking, this is a bit of a follow-on to something we were discussing, Scotland's place in the world. How would Scotland aim to secure itself and play an active role globally once it gains independence? This is assuming you do, once it gains independence from the rest of the UK. What do Army, Navy, Air Force, and intelligence services look like? What do you plan to stand up, and how will you plan to benefit from the NHS? So a lot in there.
There's a lot in there, yeah. Actually, we answered a lot of those questions in what we called the white paper, the prospectus we put forward ahead of the referendum in 2014. We'd have conventional forces in Scotland, Army, Navy, Air Force. We would have those that were appropriately sized for Scotland's size as a country and the strategic objectives that we have, securing our own country, our maritime interests first and foremost, and being able to play our part globally. That is important for us, and it's important for the world, particularly the part of the world we're located in. In terms of the National Health Service, in a sense, that question is answered every day right now. The National Health Service is already what's called a devolved responsibility of the Scottish Government. So as First Minister, I and my ministers are already responsible for the National Health Service, for funding it, for supporting it, for taking the decisions that determine its future. So, there are some big threats to the health service, potentially, if we're not independent from, if the UK government decides to cut budgets, that has a knock-on effect to Scotland, but the policy and operational decisions around the National Health Service are already taken here in Scotland.
Yeah. I believe we have a question from the audience from Gus Noble. So Gus Noble, if you want to appear and ask, the floor is yours. You're going to need to unmute. We can see you, but not hear you.
First Minister, greetings and good morning from the Chicago Scots. Scotland's greatest export is her people.
Absolutely.
Could you talk about the importance of Scotland's engagement with the diaspora around the world?
Well, hello, and it's lovely to see you and to talk to you. As you will know, Global Scots is an organisation, almost a virtual network of people of Scottish connection or Scottish descent, or Scottish people who've gone to live overseas, that we try to mobilise to promote Scottish interests in the part of the world they live in, and to engage with the wider diaspora. And the work that Global Scots do in the United States in particular is so important to everything we're trying to achieve economically and culturally here in Scotland. And we want to strengthen that once we get past the COVID crisis, to be able to do much more around that, building on the work that's been done in the past. I should take the opportunity to say, though, that we want to encourage people from other countries to come and live in Scotland as well. We need to see not just people as our greatest export, which that is undoubtedly true, but we want Scotland to be a place where people feel welcome to come and live, work and study, because we think diversity makes countries stronger and better. But we need more people to come to Scotland as well for our own economic interests. So that two-way exchange is really important to us.
I believe the Scottish diaspora in my own house, where I'm speaking to you from, would thank you as well. My husband was born in Glasgow and raised in Edinburgh, and we have two Scottish American teenagers who are probably going to go through the door behind me at some moment. So thank you for that. That message. Let me read to you. This is a question that's coming in over the chat, over the Q&A. This is from Ian Houston, who is president of the Scottish Business Network US. It's a long question. I will summarize. It's about chambers of commerce. And he asks, you've been a genuine advocate for Scottish trade, not just with North America, but globally. What works well? What doesn't? What more could be done to build capacity and capability?
That's a great question, and I would be really keen to follow up in more detail with some dialogue after this session. What works well? I think Scotland's reputation as a really good place to do business. We are the best, and this has been the case for years now, the strongest performing part of the UK outside of London when it comes to attracting direct investment into Scotland. We've got good infrastructure, good education. Our people are fantastic. Obviously, we've got great scenery, not always great weather, but great weather at the moment, which might not be a great thing, going back to our climate change discussion. I think we need to always be looking at how we promote that better. I think we need to be, and we're getting better at this, be more strategic about the sectors and the areas where we've got a comparative advantage and therefore can really punch above our weight. But this is a big success story for Scotland, but we always want to do better. And coming out of the pandemic, there's a real imperative to do so.
Yeah. Mr. Houston, did you get what you needed? Got the answer there? You want to follow up? Great. Thank you. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction and ask about Ireland. Your views on a united Ireland. Should there be one?
I take the view that's not for me to opine on, because I'm not Irish. I love Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and the north of Ireland. It's, you know, the Republic of Ireland is one of my favourite countries in the world. I think it will happen. But when, I don't know. I think Brexit, just as Brexit has made Scottish independence, I think even more likely, I think Brexit has probably made a united Ireland more likely than was the case before that. But it's not for people who are not Scottish and who don't live in Scotland to dictate whether or not, or even, you know, say whether or not they think Scotland should be independent. Of course, everybody's free to have an opinion, but it's not for me to decide whether Ireland should be reunified. I happen to think it will happen. Do I think that would be a good thing? I think if it's what people in Ireland want, then yes, I think that is something that we should be perfectly positive about.
Yeah, and just I think we have time for one more. And if I may exercise moderator prerogative, I would love, you touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more your plans in terms of climate, in terms of Scotland being green, whether you are independent or not in the coming years, that part of your place in the world, and what kind of leadership you think a very small country like Scotland might be able to exert.
Well, you know, and I said this was the easy bit earlier on, so I will repeat that. We have the most, or amongst the most ambitious climate change targets of any country in the world, not just in the scale of the ambition, net zero by 2045, but we include lots of things in the calculation of our emissions that other countries don't, aviation emissions, for example. So in terms of the scale of the ambition that we set, we're up there with the best in the world, and I think that is right. What we do to deliver those targets is what matters. We've already pretty much completely decarbonized our electricity system. Almost all of our electricity already comes from renewable sources. We're now seeking to replicate that success in terms of how we heat our homes. We're investing a lot in decarbonizing the heating of homes and buildings. We set an ambitious target to try to reduce petrol and diesel vehicles from our roads and promote electric and low emission vehicle infrastructure. So we're taking the actions to meet those targets. We've got a big oil and gas industry, and we're in transition away from fossil fuels to renewables more generally. We've also pioneered in what we've been doing the concept of just transition, of making sure we make the transition in a way that is fair, doesn't leave people and communities behind. And we're European co-chair right now of what's called the Under 2 Coalition. Governments of sub-national countries like we are right now, or states in the US, coming together to look at what we can do and look at how we put more pressure on the bigger country governments across the world. And that's particularly important as we lead into COP.
Nicola Sturgeon, leader, as we just heard, of the pro-independence Scottish National Party and First Minister of Scotland. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and taking our questions.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.
First Minister, thank you very much. All best with everything that you're dealing with in Scotland. And to Mary Louise Kelly, thank you so much for being such a great correspondent and now host of NPR's All Things Considered. Thanks very much to both of you.